My name is Mike Wilson, and until tonight, I thought my life was pretty good. But what I didn't know was that it was about to become hell. Overnight, everything I loved was taken from me, or threatened to be taken from me. Yet I survived, and for years I took comfort in one Bible verse. Running is not for the swift, nor battle for the strong, nor food for the wise, nor riches for the brilliant, nor favor for the learned, but time and chance happen to all. I married Jenny Smith 3 months after graduating from college, and we had been married for a little over 7 years when Jenny completely betrayed me. I reviewed every minute of our married life that I could scoop up and found nothing to indicate that my life was about to turn to shit. I was completely blindsided. Jenny and I had met in college. She was very attractive, about 5 foot 6 inches tall, with blonde hair and emerald green eyes. Jenny wasn't overly wealthy, but in my mind, she was perfect. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is a goddess, Jenny was a 9, maybe even a 9.5. But she had this charm about her that just drew people in. Jenny drew me, body and soul, to hello. We were so well suited for each other, and our goals seemed to be a perfect match, or at least the goals that Jenny talked to me about. Anyway, we dated and eventually got married. If Jenny was 9 or 9.5 with fantastic charm, I was 8 or 8.5, but I'm more of the strong silent type. I'm 5 feet 8 inches tall, weigh 190 pounds, and have sandy brown hair. I had a fairly active social life in high school and college, and I've had my share of adventures in the bedroom. I would never be confused for a sports or movie star. However, I have occasionally had women without a date look at me. I won't bore you with the long story of how Jenny and I ended up together. I'll just say that we met in a statistics class in junior high school. Over the next 18 months, we became like two peas in a pod. And just before graduation, I was lucky enough to get a good job, so our future looked very bright. One thing that should have made me wary was that Jenny was very reluctant to take me to meet her parents, John and Alma. It wasn't until after the wedding that I realized that Jenny was completely shy of them. In fact, I think I might never have met them if I hadn't insisted on talking to her father before proposing to her. For a day or two, I thought we were on the verge of breaking up. But then Jenny gave in and arranged for us to visit her parents at their house. At this meeting, I learned that Jenny had grown up in a very poor family and was very ashamed of that fact. But it seemed to me that these were wonderful people and Jenny had nothing to be ashamed of. They were warm, compassionate, and very friendly. They didn't have much, but they were always willing to share whatever they had. My father died when I was 14 and my mother died when I was 20. So I grew to love John and Alma Smith as if they were my real parents. They lived in a little house in an old, not the best neighborhood. It was a one-story dwelling of just over 1,000 square feet. It was simple, with 3 bedrooms and 1 bath. They had a decent-sized living room, but a small kitchen. Nevertheless, John made sure the house was in good condition, and the lawn was neat and trimmed. Alma, in turn, kept the inside clean. So, over the years, it saddened me that my parents neglected Jenny. But whenever I brought it up, it led to an argument. So I avoided any mention of John and Alma, but always kept an eye on them. I called them at least once a week, and sometimes I was able to get Jenny to talk to them. But beyond wanting to keep in touch, I listened to see if they needed anything. For example, one day, I found out that John's lawnmower had broken down, and he didn't have the money to fix it. So I bought a used lawnmower and told John that I had a new one, and that he knew someone who could use my old one. I think he knew what I was doing, but accepted the mower gratefully. Like I said, I had a good job that paid well, so I was willing to help if needed. I started out as a staff accountant for a fairly large manufacturing firm with plants in 5 states and 2 foreign countries. I worked in the firm's headquarters, where the accounting department consisted of only 18 people, including me. Despite the small size of the department, we handled all accounting and tax operations for all of the firm's businesses. Even though I was an entry-level accountant, I was paid a high 5-figure salary. But 3 years after I joined the firm, 2 things helped me advance my career. First, John Stanton, our department manager, retired. Second, I passed the CPA exam. At first, they tried to hire a new manager from the outside to replace John, but after the second option fell away, I was offered the job. I was promoted to head of the accounting department, and my salary was raised to 6 figures. That made Jenny happy because now we could afford a bigger house and buy more expensive cars. Shortly after the wedding, Jenny became pregnant and we had twins, a girl and a boy. At first, Jenny was not happy when she found out she was pregnant. She complained bitterly that it was too soon. She wanted to travel and enjoy life first. As for me, I was ecstatic. Fortunately, once the twins, Glenda and Mark, were born, Jenny became a wonderful mother. For the first 5.5 years, she was a stay-at-home mom. But once the kids went to kindergarten, Jenny insisted on getting a job. With a degree in English, the only decent-paying job she could find was as an administrative assistant at a law firm. When I found out where Jenny would be working, I worried that she might be led astray. I had read many stories of married women having affairs with one or more attorneys while working in law firms. However, this never happened. The attorney she worked for was Clem Flint, one of the original partners, and he was a 55-year-old man with a potbelly. He also had a wife, whom he adored, and 5 children. Mr. Flint was a devoted Christian, like his partners, and tolerated no fooling around. Our marriage seemed very strong. However, in the 6th year of our marriage, I noticed that Jenny was not in good spirits. I confronted her one day after she yelled at Glenda for forgetting to put a plate in the sink. "What's going on with you, Jenny?" I said quietly. "You didn't have to take it out on her. It was just a plate, for God's sake." Jenny started to cry. "It wasn't a plate. I'm just so depressed because I feel like my life is passing me by and I don't have a chance to live. I feel like I'm just someone's wife or mom. There are so many places I want to visit but will probably never see. So many beautiful things we can never afford. My life is shit." I was shocked at the way Jenny described our life together. I figured she was having a midlife crisis or something and suggested we see a counselor. The suggestion was met with hostility. "I'm not crazy. I just want to live a better life." With those words, Jenny left. For weeks on end, the kids and I walked light. But it wasn't all bad. Jenny would lose her temper, and for a few weeks we would become a loving family. But then the disgruntled Jenny would reappear. I was convinced that this was just a rough patch, and eventually Jenny would snap out of it. And if she didn't, I would marry her, for better or worse. I loved Jenny with all my heart, and I was sure she loved me. Besides, we had 2 wonderful children, and I knew Jenny loved them. They were great kids, and I spent as much time with them as I could, especially with Jenny's mood swings. I felt sorry for the kids because they didn't understand why Mom was sad and angry at times. So I tried to shield them from it and always told them that no matter how Mom acted, she still loved them to bits. On weekends, I often planned trips around town with Mark and Glenda. Sometimes Jenny would join us, but most often not. The kids loved having their happy mom riding with us, but were relieved when we left their unhappy mom at home. And things were tense in our house until the 4th of July picnic that my company threw every year. It was a fun time for all the employees, and surprisingly, Jenny even looked forward to it. After the 4th of July picnic, everything in our house was better than usual. Jenny's mood improved dramatically and our lives returned to normal. I couldn't have been happier. But then came the New Year's Eve party at my company's office, and my life became a living hell. Jenny and I usually skipped the New Year's Eve party at the company. Neither of us were big drinkers, and I loved dancing more than Jenny did. So for both of us, New Year's Eve was just an excuse to drink copious amounts of alcohol and fool around. Usually, we would take the kids out to dinner, put them to bed and watch the ball drop, then climb into bed and make love to celebrate New Year's Eve. This New Year's Eve was different. Jenny informed me that for the first time in years, she really wanted to leave. She attributed it to the fact that we hadn't danced in a long time. This struck me as odd because Jenny wasn't such a good dancer. It all seemed strange to me, but if Jenny wanted to go to a party to dance, I happily agreed. When we got to the party, I was surprised to see our company owner Brad Colson there. The only company event he regularly attended was the 4th of July picnic. In fact, it was at the last 4th of July picnic that Jenny first met the owner of the company. It was noticeable that everyone was a little surprised to see the boss at this particular party. Apparently, he liked the picnic because he liked to participate in volleyball and softball games. He wasn't a bad athlete, but no one had the guts to tell him he wasn't as good as he thought he was. We have several guys who played baseball in college or junior high, and one woman who went to Ohio State on a full scholarship to play volleyball. Once Jenny was settled, I headed out to get drinks for us. But no sooner had I returned than the music started playing, and Brad asked my wife to dance. He danced through 3 or 4 songs before returning her to our table. When I suggested that Jenny dance, she said she just wanted to rest. But half an hour later, when Brad showed up, she jumped up and danced 5 songs in a row with him. Eventually, I managed to dance 2 dances with Jenny before she cited fatigue. About 15 minutes before midnight, Brad came back again. Jenny didn't even look in my direction as she took his hand. To put it mildly, I was very angry, but I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of my boss. I'll talk to Jenny when we get home. I was sitting there pondering when someone said there was 1 minute left until midnight. I looked around for my wife because I wanted the new year to start with a kiss from her. But I was stunned when I saw Brad pull Jenny to him and kiss her on the lips. Anger boiled up inside me and I headed over to where they were still hugging. I pushed Brad away from my wife and yelled, "Leave my wife alone, you bastard!" The room was suddenly deathly quiet, all eyes on us. No one had ever spoken to Mr. Coulson like that before. I didn't care that he was my boss. He was out of line, and I wasn't going to stand for it. I didn't care if he fired me. My heart was racing, and I knew my face was turning red. I wasn't a fighter, but if Brad was going to do something nasty to me, I was ready to fight him face to face. But he only smirked. "Jenny, I think it's time to go home," I said through clenched teeth. I reached for Jenny's hand, but she yanked it away. "Mike, I'm sorry," Jenny said, taking Brad's hand, "but I'm going with Brad. This is just for tonight. We'll talk tomorrow." I was so stunned I couldn't get a word out. Before I knew it, Brad and Jenny were gone and everyone was staring at me. It was the most humiliating thing I had ever experienced in my life. I left immediately and headed home. The day after Dee. When I woke up on New Year's Day, I was suffering from the worst hangover I had ever experienced. The previous night had been too much crying and drinking and too little sleep. I had raged against heaven and hell. I had plotted and planned my revenge on Brad Coulson. I was sure he had tricked my wife into leaving with him. I had already rehearsed what I would say to my wife when she came home. And I had no doubt we'd spent a lot of time in counseling. Yes, despite the total disrespect, I wanted Jenny back. I loved her so much. Still, I puzzled over how to truly ruin Brad's mood, but the only plans I could think of were extremely cruel. And just as quickly as I came up with one of them, I discarded it because I didn't want to go to jail over a piece of shit like Brad Coulson. It took 3 hours, but I was finally able to get my bad headache under control. I called the babysitter and told her I'd be there in a couple hours to pick up Mark and Glenda. Then reality started to seep into my life and I became paranoid. What if Jenny decided she wasn't coming back? That suddenly became a real possibility for me. What if she takes the kids first? Then I would be finished. So I dressed quickly and hurried to get the kids before Jenny guessed. I wanted to start any conversation with Jenny from a position of strength. The kids were happy to see me, but wanted to know where Mom was. It took everything I had not to break down in front of my 2 children. So, taking a deep breath, I lied. I told them that Mom needed to go on a trip. They looked disappointed until I asked if they wanted to go to IHOP for pancakes. While the kids ate, I started making 2 lists. One about how we were going to get through this and one about how to plan for divorce. When I got home, I was both relieved and disappointed that Jenny wasn't there. I wanted to make things right with my wife, but I was afraid of what I might do or say. Just then, I saw the answering machine flashing. It was a message from Jenny, who decided that since my emotions were so strong, it would be best if we postponed our conversation for a week. She explained that Brad needed a secretary for a business trip and she was going to fill in for her. Jenny turned out to be full of crap. The only person who would be filling in for her was Brad. I crumpled up my list of how to get back together and threw it in the trash. The emotional pain I was feeling at that moment seemed 10 times worse than any physical pain I had ever experienced in my life. It's impossible to know what it feels like to be betrayed by the person you loved and trusted the most in your life. During these days, I realized how a person could go insane and cause horrible bodily harm to those they supposedly loved, thoughtlessly destroy property, and, yes, even consider taking their own life. All of these thoughts ran endlessly through my brain. Finally, thankfully, I was able to dismiss one of these thoughts. I would never kill myself because I loved my children too much. The thought that they might die because of a selfish act on my part made me cringe. However, other dark images continued to arise, and a new one was added to them. Were Mark and Glenda really my children? I readily agreed when the kids asked if they could play in the backyard. I needed this free time to get my act together and start planning a new life. While the kids played, I began to expand my list of things I needed to do to protect myself and my kids from the coming storm of crap. The first item on my list was a DNA test. I bought a kit when we went to a restaurant. I tried to cover as much information as I could, but realized I was probably missing a lot. So the first thing I did was call a friend who had gone through a divorce and asked him if he would recommend his divorce attorney. He replied that he would not, but would definitely recommend his ex-wife's lawyer. I asked if I could get the name and phone number of this attorney. After a few minutes of searching, he gave me the information I needed. The attorney's name was Tom Watson, and he had an office with 3 other attorneys who dealt exclusively with divorces, wills, and probate. I called the number listed, even though it was New Year's Eve, as I figured I could leave a message and they would call me back on Tuesday. To my surprise, a man answered the phone. Tom Watson. I quickly realized I was talking to the attorney I wanted to hire, and before he could blow me off, I explained my problem. He was probably going to make an appointment with me until I mentioned that my wife's lover was Brad Colson. Then he became very interested. He asked if I could come to his office at 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning. I replied that I could if I could find someone to watch my children. Alright, please bring your children with you because they will help you understand what I think you should do. Before you come, I want you to gather all of your financial documents, including bank statements, credit card bills, utility bills, and mortgage payments. I also want you to list everything you and Jenny have spent over $100 on. Don't forget to bring birth certificates, marriage certificates, social security numbers, tax returns for all the years you were married, and anything else that might be relevant. After gathering everything I could get my hands on, including a copy of the phone message Jenny had left me, I spent the rest of the day playing with the kids. In the evening, as we were on our way to Joe's Pizza, I stopped for a DNA test. After swabbing the baby's cheeks and my own, I took the kit to the Federal Express office. The DNA test company promised that the results would be ready in 2 days. I was greatly relieved when the test results showed that the babies were mine. The next morning was a bit hectic as I fed and prepared the kids. Before heading to my appointment, I called work to let them know I would be taking the rest of the week off. Tom Watson's office was larger than I had imagined, and after introductions, Tom led us into a spacious conference room. I took Mark and Glenda to the far end and gave them mini tablets to play their educational games. Tom and I sat at a conference table at the other end of the room. I broke down twice talking about how my wife had left me for my boss on New Year's Eve. I still couldn't believe that she had discarded me like some one-day-old trash. Tom turned out to be very understanding and compassionate. He told me that things would get better, but I was in too dark a state to believe it. When I finished telling him about my problems, Tom pulled out a picture and held it out to me across the table. I want to let you know something before you agree to hire me. This is a picture of my cousin Abby Colson. She was once married to Joe Colson, Brad Colson's brother. Joe cheated on my cousin and then left her for someone else. I represented Abby in her divorce, but I was duped because Brad paid for his brother's legal team. They overwhelmed me with paperwork, and I was too naive to realize what they were doing. I had just passed the bar exam and still thought everyone was playing fair. Abby ended up on the losing end. It took me 5 years, but I finally got the judgment partially reversed. Since that day, I have been working on becoming a better family law attorney. Even though I didn't get Abby what she deserved, my partial victory pissed him off. And while I welcome a rematch with Mr. Colson, I want you to know that Brad will sick his lawyers on you, especially since I represent your interests. But I promise I'll give you everything I have. That's enough for me, I said firmly. Let's get started. I suddenly felt good that someone was on my side and that I could finally fight back. We spent the next 3 hours going over all the papers I'd brought, discussing what I could expect, and finally I was asked what I really wanted out of all this. Of course, I'd prefer none of this to happen, but that's impossible, so I want the house, half of the property, an untouched pension, no alimony, and no child support. Perhaps you should temper your expectations, Tom said solemnly, but I'll fight to get all that for you. You want full custody? I shook my head, then clarified. If Jenny doesn't want kids, I sure do, but I know she loves them and would probably fight for full custody. It seems to me that joint custody would be fair. Well, to be honest, I'm out of here, Tom said glumly. You need to prepare yourself for the fact that she'll probably get primary custody. Given Mr. Coulson's wealth and the likelihood that he intends to marry your wife after the divorce, she may become a stay-at-home mother. Unless you plan to remarry and can prove that your wife is a stay-at-home mom, I think the best you can hope for is liberal visitation rights. But knowing what a jerk Coulson is, they'll probably fight for that too. That really sucks, I said with venom. I didn't do anything wrong, but I'm the one who ended up on the losing end. As far as your children are concerned, that's probably a fair assessment. However, the upside is that if your wife marries Brad, you won't have to pay child support. But the downside is that you will still have to pay alimony. I'll gladly pay child support just to see the kids. At the last meeting, Tom was talking to Mark and Glenda, and I wasn't in the room. I don't know what exactly they talked about, but Tom looked pleased when he came out with the kids. "You must be some kind of father," Tom said as he took me aside, "because your kids love you so much. Unfortunately, they seem to love their mother too, but not as much as they love you." I left Tom Watson's office feeling better financially, but very worried about how much time I would be allowed to spend with my children. Tom told me that he would draft a divorce petition and a petition for temporary custody of the children for me. We planned to serve them on my wife shortly after she returned from her business trip. 8 days after DD Day. Jenny called in the morning and asked if we could talk. I replied that yes and arranged for the kids to be somewhere else. Everything seemed to be going just as Tom had predicted. I was no longer under any illusions about Jenny wanting to reconcile. Although she was tearing me apart, putting the genie back in the bottle was impossible. Our marriage broke up and Jenny went into the trade. I wasn't surprised when she rang the bell. Tom had told me to expect something like that. Nevertheless, I kept her waiting and rang the bell 2 more times. When I finally opened the door, it cost me a lot of labor to contain my emotions. I didn't say a word, just turned around and went into the kitchen to get a beer. When I sat down at the table, Jenny asked where the kids were, and I almost snapped. But instead, I calmly said, "So now you're worried about them?" "I guess I deserved it," she quickly tried to reassure me. "But I truly believe that our meeting would have been very ugly and dangerous after I left you on New Year's Eve. I apologize for that. We had not originally planned for me to leave you that night. I was going to tell you about it on New Year's Eve, but Brad didn't want to wait any longer. Besides, the trip came up because Brad was having problems at one of the plants. He convinced me it would be better to let you cool off. And Brad was absolutely right. I wasn't sure at first, but after that trip I realized he was my soulmate." "Isn't it amazing that your soulmate turned out to be super rich?" I heard the sarcasm in my voice. "I assume you're here to talk about our divorce. So let's get to it so you can stop wasting my time. I have something much more important to do than talk to you. I need to take a shit." Anger flashed in Jenny's eyes. "You don't have to be rude and insulting. I don't care what you think." Jenny was furious. She wasn't used to people talking to her the way I did. "I don't have to sit here and take insults." "Then leave," I said, stood up and headed for the backyard. I didn't really want Jenny to leave. However, given my state of mind, it would have been the best decision. But apparently my attitude made her nervous and she lost her fervor. "No, I think we should finish this conversation." Then she rummaged through her purse, pulled out an envelope, and held it out across the table. I opened it and started reading. Tom was right again. The terms Jenny offered were quite generous until I got to the last paragraph. At that point, I almost threw myself across the table to rip Jenny's throat out. I threw the papers in her face. "You can tell Brad Coulson to take this proposal and shove it up his ass. I will never consent to him adopting my children. And offering me $100,000 for consent is just plain mean. Mike, Brad, and I can offer the kids a much better life than you can. Screw you, Jenny, and to hell with your shitty hubby." "Mike, this is what's best for the kids," she began, ignoring my insults. "I'll stay home, and they'll have the opportunity to go to better schools. They'll live in a better house and be able to travel. That's something you can't provide. But if it helps, Brad is willing to pay you $250,000 to allow the adoption." "Jenny, not only are you a total slut, but you're an idiot. What is it about the words screw yourself and screw your soulmate that you don't understand?" "I'm sure Brad will increase his offer to $500,000, Jenny said quickly. "That's probably more money than you'll ever get in your life. We were barely making ends meet on your salary. And don't forget that Brad is your employer, and your job could disappear in an instant. Even if he offered $100 million, I wouldn't take it. I was on the verge of doing something stupid, and I needed to calm down. I wanted to throw Jenny out the front door, but that would ruin Tom's well-thought-out plan. I glanced at the clock and then turned back to Jenny. I've had time to reflect on our marriage, and I've realized it's not pretty. You might think you have a golden kitty, but you don't. We had a pretty good marriage for a while, but for the last year you've been a shitty wife, a shitty mother, and a shitty person in general. We weren't just making ends meet, but you were always spending more than you needed to because you have to have the best of everything. I don't need Brad's crumbs. And if Brad plans to fire me, I'll have to go to the EEOC. Right now, the court has given me custody of the children because you gave them up. I didn't give up my children, she said angrily. Then the doorbell rang. It's for you, I said with a smile as I headed for the door. As I opened the door, I saw a sheriff's deputy standing there. I stepped aside and let him see Jenny, who was standing just behind and to the side of me. He nodded and asked, "Are you Jenny Wilson?" After she showed him her driver's license, he handed me an envelope and told me she had received a subpoena. I grinned as I watched her read the divorce petition and then run away in tears. God, that felt so good. She just left and was served with the statement, I informed Tom on my cell phone. I hope you behaved yourself, Tom asked. It was difficult, but I behaved myself. However, Jenny left here in tears after she was handed her statement, I admitted. I don't see what that has to do with it. You're hardly wrong about what they're going to offer. True, they threw in one kicker that almost made me lose my senses. It sounds like Brad Colson wants to adopt my kids. He can't do that, can he? That's what I didn't expect, Tom admitted. As for whether they can take away your parental rights, that would be extremely difficult unless they can prove that you're a completely unfit parent. So you will have to be extremely careful about how you behave around your wife and Brad. Also, try to stay close to other people who can be your witnesses if need be. I don't think that bastard Brad can fabricate a story and get witnesses to swear to it. I know you're a good father, but don't forget that they may try to twist even the most innocent events to make you look worse. Now that I know their plan of action, we'll be ready. Tom, does it ever get easier? I asked as the pain of Jenny leaving me came over me again. Yes, it gets, Tom answered immediately. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll admit that you're not as devastated today as you were the night your wife left you. However, there will be good days and bad days for a long time to come, and I want to warn you that as we move forward, we will probably lose a few skirmishes with Brad and Jenny, but each time we lose, we will regroup and find new ways to fight back. As they used to say in the 60s, keep the faith, baby. In the week I took off work, I made all the financial preparations Tom had advised me to make. I opened new accounts and transferred half of all the money into them. I arranged for the twins to go to school after school. Their school had a program where kids could stay until 5:30. It was perfect because I worked from 7 in the morning until 3:30. That was enough time for me to get home, do some chores around the house, and still have time to put the kids to bed. The week also gave me the opportunity to schedule time to spend with the kids. Jenny was very free to run the house, especially when it was time for the kids to go to bed. However, I needed to establish a stricter routine if I wanted it to work. I made them bathe, brush their teeth, and go to bed by 8 p.m. They objected at first, but when I promised to read them 2 stories instead of 1, they began to look forward to bedtime. Spending time with the kids became a lifesaver for me. We became even closer, and surprisingly, they didn't ask about Mom too often. But one day Mark asked if his mom would ever come back. I didn't want to hurt the kids, but I wasn't going to lie to them either. I told them the whole truth. Their mom had found a new man she liked better than me and wanted to live with him. More than that, she wanted him to be their new daddy. Both kids started crying, and that's when I felt awful. I may have said too much, so I quickly assured them that no matter what, I would always be their daddy. That calmed them down, and I got 2 big hugs. When Saturday morning came, it was time to take the kids to riding lessons. Even though Mom hadn't seen them in over a week, Mark and Glenda were excited because they were going to see Miss Darla. The riding lessons were my idea, which Jenny opposed. Like many little girls, Glenda loved horses and wanted to learn to ride. Mark just agreed because he didn't want to be left out. However, Mark quickly became a much better rider than his sister. Darla Lampson owned a horse farm that also offered riding lessons. She was an excellent riding instructor, and the children adored her. She was a cheerful soul with a beautiful face but 10 or 15 pounds overweight. However, she had a warm smile and an infectious laugh. I liked her from the first time we met. Jenny teased me and said I liked her because she laughed at my corny jokes, which was true. Darla, on the other hand, I liked her right away. "Where's Mrs. Wilson?" Darla asked as I stood at the corral fence. "Mrs. Wilson and I are getting a divorce," I answered honestly. "I'm sorry," Darla said quickly. I didn't mean to intrude. "No, it's okay," I said to reassure her. "It's just the way it is. I just hope we can keep the kids in these writing lessons. I have the kids now, but my lawyer says the court will probably appoint her as primary custodian and me as visiting custodian. I'm going to fight for joint custody, but things aren't looking too good." "Why?" "Well, once the divorce is finalized, Jenny will marry her rich lover. Then she'll stay home and I'll have to hire babysitters. And the best part is, I work for that asshole Brad who kidnaps his wife. So, as if things weren't bad enough already, I expect to be out of a job soon when he starts tightening the screws on me." "That's not Brad Colson, is it?" Darla said, narrowing her eyes. "Yeah, do you know him?" "I've never met him in person, but I've had the misfortune of meeting his lawyers. His lot joins the ranch, and he wanted 2 acres of my land but didn't want to pay for it. All he wanted was to create a buffer between his property and mine. The only thing he did was plant dozens of trees and bushes. Heck, if he had asked me to do that, I would have done it. But Mr. Colson doesn't believe in asking. He believes in just taking what he wants. Anyway, his lawyers filed one motion after another, and I couldn't afford to fight him. Besides, the land was mostly swampy, and I wasn't using it. After 5 months of litigation, I decided I was wasting my money fighting over land I wasn't using. I finally agreed that if he would pay my attorney's bill, I would relinquish the rights to the 2 acres in his favor. As a result, my property taxes went down a bit. Nevertheless, the whole experience left a sour taste in my mouth for Brad Colson. I hope I'll be around when he gets his retribution. Yeah, I agree with you. Brad is a real piece of shit. But my soon-to-be ex-wife chose him to associate her star with. And I'd like to be there too when not only Brad but my wife gets hers, I said, hoping Brad would leave her sooner rather than later. "What are you going to do if Mr. Colson fires you?" Darla asked. "I've already started a new career. I'm a tax preparer, but I'm working as an accountant for Mr. Colson. I've always done taxes and bookkeeping on the side to get extra money. Recently, I have expanded my scope and have brought in 3 small businesses that want me to do their bookkeeping and taxes for them. It's still not enough to survive, but I'm saving all the money I can get from my full-time job and side business to help myself when I get laid off. Right now, I'm working out of my house, but I'm pretty sure I'll have to put it up for sale once the divorce is finalized. Then I'll have to look for an apartment that won't be suitable for setting up a business." Said Dad. "Well, if you can do my bookkeeping for the money I'm paying now," Darla said softly, "I'll gladly give you my business." "I can't ask you to do that," I protested. "If your accountant is doing a good job, there's no reason to change them." "I don't know if they're doing a good job or not," Darla grinned. "They were the accountants for the ranch when my father died and bequeathed the property to me. They're one of the big accounting firms in town, Minter, Smith & Zeller. They handle my payroll, quarterly and annual taxes, and I pay them $2,000 monthly and about $5,500 in federal taxes. I don't know anyone at that firm, and the one time I called them with a question, it took weeks before they got back to me." I glanced quickly at Glenda and Mark and saw them happily jumping their horses over the foot-high railing with the instructor running beside them. Then I turned to Darla again. "Okay, if you're sure, I'll look at your books right away. If I can do this job for the same money, I'll add you to my huge client list." Darla laughed and led me into her office. She pulled out the books for the current year, which were maintained by hand, and last year's federal tax returns. I quickly realized that the price Minter, Smith & Zeller had set was simply exorbitant. "I can't do it for the money they're asking," I told Darla with a smirk. "I can't in good conscience charge you more than $750 a month and $2,000 for your federal tax refund." "No," Darla protested. "I'm willing to pay you that much. No, I don't work that way. In my opinion, your current accountants are cheating you. You are probably too small an accountant for them, and they don't care if you leave. I will only take you on as a client if I can offer you a fair price." "Wow, I didn't expect that," Darla said gratefully. "That's going to help me a lot. Since I got the ranch 3 years ago, I've had a very difficult time. Saving $1,250 a month will help a lot. Thank you. And it goes without saying that Glenda and Mark's lessons will be free from now on. I can't ask you to do that, I protested in vain. You didn't ask for it, Darla smiled. I'm telling you. Getting Darla's rancher as a client was a big help, but the divorce was just starting to heat up. It was going to be a long and ugly road. Besides, despite Tom's words about things getting better, it wasn't happening. It seemed like every week there was a picture of Brad and Jenny in the society section of the newspaper. It was so unfair. Jenny's life seemed perfect, and mine was in the toilet. Added to that was the frustration of not being able to figure out how to get back at them. I was lonely and miserable. It took anywhere from 2 weeks to 8 weeks after DD Day. My day started out great when I got a call that Harvey's Hardware wanted me to do their accounting. But after that, the day turned into a complete shitstorm. When I got to work, I was informed that I was fired. I wasn't surprised and was even relieved. It was extremely awkward after the New Year's Eve party. Although no one said anything to my face, it seemed like conversations suddenly stopped when I walked into the room. Still, losing my job was depressing. Brad was still pulling all the strings. Tom was already preparing paperwork to file a wrongful termination lawsuit with the EEOC. He told me, however, that it would be a long, hard fight that could take years. But Tom sent out a press release about my battle with Brad, which I heard didn't make my former boss too angry. The day took a turn for the worse when Tom called me a few hours later to let me know that a judge had signed an order for joint custody of Jenny as of that evening. I was devastated until Tom explained that it wasn't that bad. The kids would stay in the house, but Jenny would be able to live there as well. Realizing how inconvenient this was, she decided not to exercise that right. Instead, she would pick up the kids after school every day, and I would pick them up in the evenings. It was a nightmare for me. Every night I had to watch Jenny and Brad while I picked up Glenda and Mark. And Jenny usually made sure I could see how happy she was. She'd hug Brad, kiss him, or say something affectionate. I was totally depressed, and the kids, even worse, were totally confused. I didn't think things could get any worse, but I was wrong. As soon as Jenny got joint custody, her attorneys started filing motions to change the primary residence to Brad's house. The basis of their motion was that I was denying Jenny visitation. They also claimed that I was trying to turn the children against her. Upon learning of this, Tom immediately filed a complaint with the court, claiming that I had never denied Jenny visitation rights. Moreover, he suggested that the judge interview the children when they talked to their mother in the evenings. The children always asked the question, "When are you coming to visit us, Mommy?" Fortunately, the judge decided that the children would stay home for now. However, he did not mention the charges against me in any way. This lack of response bothered Tom because he felt that the judge was not paying proper attention to this divorce case. But, he observed, it was fair to point out that at any given time the judge had 30 or 40 cases pending. The judge then changed his order to require that we each have custody of the children for 2 weeks at a time. In his infinite wisdom, he decided that the children would be shuttled back and forth between our two homes. At first, I thought this would be extremely inconvenient for Jenny, since the child's school was a 35-minute drive from Brad's house. But I didn't think about how devious Jenny and Brad would be. But I was soon to find out. As soon as Jenny left me at the New Year's Eve party and went home with Brad, I had to realize that I had never really known this woman. Truth be told, I don't think Jenny knew herself either. Still, it's hard to let go of someone when you love them so desperately. However, the first time Jenny took Glenda and Mark away, I was shocked by what my soon-to-be ex-wife told me. Jenny looked nervous but determined. Once the kids were in the car and out of earshot, she turned to me. "Please don't complicate the divorce. I still care about you, and I don't want Brad to destroy you. If you let Brad adopt the children, I will provide you with full visitation rights. But I want you to understand, I'm not going to let you destroy my relationship with Brad." Wow, I shook my head. And here I thought you were just a cheating whore. But I was wrong. You're also a conniving bitch. You let me have full dating rights in the pig's eye. Fuck you. I turned and started to walk toward the house, but over my shoulder I heard her say, "You were warned." I called Tom right after Jenny left and told him about her words. Tom wasn't surprised. "I told you to expect the worst from Brad. Have you installed cameras in the house yet?" "The outside cameras will be installed tomorrow. But right now I have one in my bedroom, one in the kids' bedroom, and one in the hallway leading to the bathroom. They put another one each in the family room and the kitchen. Tomorrow, they'll put cameras in the front and backyard. That's all we can do right now. Tom looked pleased. But keep in mind that Brad's lawyers will probably start making accusations of mistreating you. The cameras should disprove all the accusations. The days Mark and Glenda spent with Jenny were difficult. Brad had a very active social life. He and Jenny were often written about in the society papers, or I saw them on TV. If it was a daytime event, they often had their children with them. In all the photos I saw, Jenny was radiant, and the kids looked excited and happy wherever they were. Each of these photos crushed my soul even more. I couldn't compete with Brad's money. I felt like he was stealing my children little by little. On Monday of the 8th week after Jenny left, everything went downhill. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, I received a call from the kids' school informing me that Mark and Glenda were absent. I immediately called Jenny. "Are the kids sick?" I asked with great concern. "No, why would you think that?" Jenny replied smugly. "The school called and said they were absent." "Oh, that," said Jenny dismissively. "I transferred them to Chesterton Primary School. It's a much better school, and it's only 5 minutes from my house." "You can't do that," I growled. "I can, and I did," she growled and hung up. My frantic call to Tom didn't calm me down one bit. He explained that we would have to fight to transfer to another school, but a judge would probably allow it because the new school had a much higher rating. Courts, as I understand it, do what they think is best for the kids, even if it sends the worst message to the kids. In this case, it was that their mother could do whatever she wanted, and their father was powerless to do anything about it. As I sank deeper and deeper into depression, Tom warned me that the worst was yet to come. He warned me to be especially vigilant because, in his opinion, this was only the first salvo from Brad and Jenny. He was absolutely right. And I thanked God that Tom had insisted that I install surveillance cameras and transmit the images to the security company and cloud. On Tuesday, Tom filed a complaint about the changes at the school. A hearing wasn't scheduled until 3 weeks later. But on Wednesday of that week, Jenny's lawyers filed a complaint accusing me of abusing our daughter. I was furious, and it took all of Tom's calming influence to keep me calm. However, 2 things happened, but I thought only one of them would end well for me. An emergency hearing was scheduled, but I was forbidden to see my children until the investigation was complete. I wasn't even allowed to have supervised visitation with them since it was a court proceeding. Tom immediately got a court order to find out the details of the charges. He wanted Jenny to give more specifics. Fortunately for me, the judge did not believe their arguments. He had encountered this kind of subterfuge many times in the past. "Let me be clear, Mr. Silas." The judge looked intently at Jenny's attorney. "I take these allegations very seriously. If they turn out to be true, I will see to it that Mr. Wilson is prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. However, if I find out that your client is trying to play a trick on me, it won't do Mrs. Wilson any good. I expect you to give Mr. Watson a detailed account of when, where, and what happened. Am I right, Mr. Silas?" Jenny's lawyer turned slightly pale and nodded. I also noticed that the smile that had been on Jenny's face suddenly disappeared. The next day, Mr. Silas emailed the accusations, but there were no specifics. I was furious that they were still playing games and trying to ruin my life, but Tom assured me that we had enough evidence to completely refute their accusations. The emergency hearing began. "Okay, Mr. Silas, you made this accusation, so what evidence do you have?" "The children told their mother," the attorney replied, "and given the seriousness of the situation, we took immediate action to protect them." "Mr. Watson," the judge turned to Tom, "what does your client have to say about this?" "Your Honor, both my client and I maintain that the accusation is a complete lie, and when we prove it, we will ask the court to impose sanctions on Mrs. Watson. If Your Honor will allow, I would like to play a series of videotapes provided by Able Security. At my suggestion, Mr. Wilson installed cameras inside and outside his home because he feared that this particular outrageous accusation would be made." Mr. Silas immediately rose to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular and questionable at best. How do we know these videotapes aren't doctored?" The judge sighed irritably. "Obviously, Mr. Silas, you are not familiar with the security system Mr. Wilson has installed in his home. The video footage taken at Mr. Wilson's house goes directly into the Able security system. From there, it is stored on the security company's server for 1 year. If my memory serves me correctly, the video is also stored in the cloud. You can only get the video from the server or the cloud with the passwords of 2 company employees. It's a secure system and I trust it. When the videos were finished, the judge made sure that nothing happened at the time Jenny indicated. The judge was not pleased. After talking to the kids for about 20 minutes, the judge and my kids walked out. They were sent back to the hallway to wait with the babysitter Jenny had brought with her. After talking to the kids, I decided to leave it as a misunderstanding. But keep in mind, Mrs. Wilson, if it happens again, I won't look down on you. Your Honor, Mr. Silas rose to his feet. Since we're here, perhaps you'll rule on the change of school? Yes, that would be appropriate, the judge said slowly. Having looked at both schools, I agree with Mrs. Wilson that Chesterton Elementary School is better. I interviewed the children and they said they liked the school. I dodged a bullet, but I lost a major battle. And that defeat was even worse than I had anticipated. Mike, I'll be honest with you. The judge's ruling was bad. It pretty much guarantees that Jenny will get primary custody of Glenda and Mark. However, there were 2 positives in today's hearing. First, you won't go to jail or be separated from your children. And second, since they couldn't charge you, you'll at least get visitation rights. Yeah, I know how that works, I said with growing anger. Jenny will find a way to ruin my visits. We'll complain, the court will tell Jenny not to do it, and those 2 cheating assholes will come up with some new way to ruin my life. Isn't there anything I can do to counter what they're doing? Tom shook his head slowly. Unless you move to the Chesterton School District and get married, I don't see the judge going any other way. That Saturday, the kids were at my house and I took them to riding lessons. Normally, I enjoyed watching them ride and occasionally talking to Darla. Today, however, I was as depressed as I could possibly be. My life was a mess. Not only had my wife left me and I'd lost my job, but as far as I could tell, her life was perfect and mine had turned to shit. And she was going to take my kids away from me. It was so unfair. She cheats, and I get punished. Hey, Mike, Darla said, taking a seat next to me on the bench. You look really depressed. It can't be that bad, can it? I explained to Darla that when the divorce from Jenny was final, the kids probably wouldn't be coming to class anymore. I told her that in order to get joint custody, I would have to move to the Chesterton School District and get married. And I had no prospects for marriage, and there was no way I could afford to move to Marion County. No offense, Mike, but your wife is a Class A bitch, Darla said. She's been treating me like dirt ever since she signed your kids up. When she showed up and started hitting on me, I was going to tell her to get her bitch ass far away. But then I saw the look on Glenda's face and I couldn't do it. I grinned sadly. No offense taken. I agree with you. We sat in silence for a few moments, and then Darla straightened up. Hey, I have an idea. My house and half of this lot are in Marion County and the Chesterton School District. Why don't you move here and we'll tell everyone we're married? Then you'll be on equal footing with your wife. I stared at Darla for a few minutes with an amused expression on my face, but then I started thinking about her proposal. The more I thought about it, the more I thought it might work. So I asked Darla to accompany me to my next meeting with Tom to explain the plan to him. He immediately rejected the offer. Mike, I realize you're desperate, but a sham marriage won't work. You'll have to produce a marriage certificate. And when they realize you're cheating them, they can give Jenny sole custody. I was bitterly disappointed, but Darla continued to insist. What if we do get married? What, we can't do that, I immediately replied. No, hear me out, Darla demanded. Suppose we announce that we're engaged, and when you get divorced, we'll get married at the courthouse. In the meantime, can you move into my house? I have 3 bedrooms, so I can sleep in mine, and you can sleep in one of the others. There's even a den in the front of the house. You could run your accounting business there. You could pay me a token amount of rent and sell your house. What do you say? Tom shifted his gaze from Darla to me, and then back to Darla. I was encouraged that he didn't immediately say no. However, he had his doubts. Okay, on the face of it, what you're proposing isn't necessarily illegal. However, you will have to perform a real marriage ceremony. In addition, there are other things to consider. We'll have to draw up an agreement that spells out Mike's financial contributions to the house. I would insist on a prenuptial agreement that spells out what assets each of you will keep when you decide to separate. And if you divorce in less than a year, I think Brad and Jenny can prove it was a dishonorable marriage. I'd suggest at least 18 months. I'll settle for all of that, Darla immediately stated. My head was spinning and I wasn't sure it was the right decision. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure. Darla, this is very taxing on you. Anything I can do to mess with Brad is all I can do, she said with a smile. From 8 weeks to 18 months after DD Day. After we signed all the papers Tom had prepared, Darla seemed to be absolutely thrilled with everything that was going on. I figured she must hate Brad as much as I did. The gist of everything we agreed to was that we would be married for at least 18 months and could divorce at any time after that. The division of property was clearly agreed upon, and we each kept what we had before the marriage and whatever we earned during those 18 months. I paid rent to live in Darla's house, but the prenuptial agreement listed that as my share of the household expenses. The next day, Darla and I went to the county courthouse and applied for a marriage license. We each had blood tests taken, and then we waited for the final child custody hearing. Tom filed for joint custody, and Jenny's attorney filed for sole custody. While Darla and I kept our marriage plans a secret, Jenny and Brad announced them to the world. Photos detailing the details of their wedding have appeared in the society papers. Apparently, over 500 people would be in attendance. Not surprisingly, I wasn't going to be one of them. On the day of the final hearing, a ball-sized knot knotted in my stomach. Although I felt I was now on equal footing with Jenny and Brad, I knew enough about the court system to realize that honesty and fairness were often not the basis for the final decision. Jenny's attorney, Mr. Silas, began by detailing my shortcomings. Mr. Wilson is currently unemployed and struggles to pay his bills. He does not live in the Chesterton School District, where Glenda and Mark Wilson currently attend. In addition, we remain concerned about Mr. Wilson's mental state. Objection, Tom shouted, jumping to his feet. The judge looked sternly at Mr. Silas and motioned for Tom to sit down. Mr. Silas, do you have evidence that Mr. Wilson's state of mind is a danger to children? Not really, Your Honor, Mr. Silas replied crushingly. Then don't, the judge snapped back. Briefly, Mr. Silas picked up smoothly. Jenny Wilson and Brad Coulson plan to marry shortly after Mrs. Wilson's divorce is finalized. Mr. Coulson's home is located in the Chesterton School District, and he has substantial funds. Mrs. Wilson will be a stay-at-home mother. Therefore, we feel that sole custody of the children is in Mrs. Wilson's best interest. After Mr. Silas had taken his seat, Tom rose. I would like to correct some of the misrepresentations Mr. Silas has presented at this hearing. First of all, Mr. Wilson has no problem paying his bills. I am presenting his financial statement to prove that Mr. Wilson has enough money to pay his bills and take care of his children. However, if Mr. Wilson had financial difficulties, it would be because Mr. Coulson unfairly fired him. We have filed a lawsuit against Mr. Coulson's parent company with the EEOC. We expect a favorable ruling when the case is finalized. In addition, Mr. Wilson has started his own accounting firm. I have attached the financial statements for this business, and you will see that it is profitable and growing. In addition, Mr. Wilson is engaged to Darla Lampson and now lives in her home in the Chesterton School District. They plan to marry as soon as the divorce is finalized. Therefore, we respectfully request that Mr. Wilson be granted primary, or at least joint custody. As Tom took his seat, I looked at Jenny. She had a stunned expression on her face. Brad's face was red with anger, and Mr. Silas's face read irritation. It gave me the most satisfying feeling I'd had in weeks. We had clearly blindsided them. I'd like to talk to the kids for a while before I make a ruling, the judge said, turning to the bailiff. The knot in my stomach had doubled in size and was now doing somersaults. The judge talked to the kids for about 20 minutes, and when they came out, they looked confused and unsure. But then they saw me and waved. I smiled and waved back, which made them both smile. They stopped and hugged their mother before walking out of the courtroom. Making a custody decision when both parents love their children is the hardest part of this job, the judge began. When I have to favor one parent, it is very painful. However, in the end, I have to do what is best for the children. The judge paused briefly, pulling a piece of paper out of a folder. I looked around the courtroom and saw the smiles on the faces of Jenny, Brad, and Mr. Silas. My heart dropped into my stomach. She was going to win again. As I said, I have to act in the best interest of the children, the judge began again. In this case, I had to consider that both parents could provide for the children, allow them to attend the same school, and have the same marital status. The deciding factor was what the children wanted. After talking to them, I learned that they wanted to spend time with both parents. Therefore, I am granting joint custody to Glenda and Mark Wilson. The children will spend 2 weeks with each parent. The agreement will begin this Sunday, and since the children are already with Mrs. Wilson, she will be with them first. 2 weeks after this Sunday, the children will be picked up by Mr. Wilson. Since their homes are only 5 or 10 minutes from each other, this will not be difficult for both parents. The transfer will take place no later than 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon every 2 weeks. Are there any other questions? When no one said anything, the judge announced that the divorce would be final in 30 days and tapped the gavel. An agreement had already been reached on the division of property. Everything would be split 50-50, and the house was up for sale and should sell pretty quickly. After all expenses, Jenny and I would each get $6,000. I'm sure it was a pittance to Jenny, but to me it would be an extra sum if I needed it. I was beyond elated, but wanted to pretend it was an expected outcome. Walking out into the hallway, I hugged the kids. Then I headed over to where Jenny and Brad were berating Mr. Silas about the judge's ruling. Mr. Silas tried unsuccessfully to explain that there was nothing he could do. "Sorry, Jenny," I said with a smirk. "I'm sorry to interrupt your tirade, but I wanted to clarify when I can pick up the kids 2 weeks from Sunday." "That's not the end of it, asshole," Brad growled. "Whatever, Brad," I said dismissively. "I just want to know when I can pick up the kids. I don't want to be charged with trespassing. If you want, we can meet at a neutral location, like McDonald's." "The judge said 2 o'clock in the afternoon, asshole. And that's the way it's going to be until our lawyers overturn that ruling," Jenny snorted. "You've really reached the bottom of the barrel. I mean, marrying Miss Piggy to get joint custody." That last remark was completely inappropriate, and it made me angry, so I pounced on it. "You're just a chatterbox. You're marrying your grandfather." "You little shit," Brad yelled. "Go outside and I'll kick you to the sidewalk." I wasn't going to fight Brad. He was taller than me by 3 inches and weighed about 30 pounds. Nevertheless, I was pissed about everything, so I piled on top of him. "Don't you need to go to the car first to get your cane?" Brad lunged at me, but I jumped back before I could reach him. Jenny must have realized how this situation could turn out and grabbed Brad's arm. At the same time, Mr. Silas stepped between us. "Mr. Colson, please," he pleaded. "If you attack Mr. Wilson, the court can grant him sole custody of the children." "Please, Brad," Jenny pleaded. Suddenly, I realized that my 2 children were clinging to my leg and yelling to Brad, "Don't hurt our daddy." Jenny glared at me, but then returned her attention to the kids. "It's okay, kids. Mr. Colson and Daddy were just fooling around. Why don't we go get some ice cream?" As they were leaving, I turned to Jenny. "I'll be there at 2 p.m. 2 weeks from Sunday." Jenny only threw me a glance, but I didn't say or do anything else. At the appointed time, I picked up the kids and we went to a movie and dinner with Miss Darla. Brad's lawyers couldn't cancel anything. The kids were thrilled that I was living on the ranch with Miss Darla. They rode horses all the time and loved cooking at Darla's place. When Jenny and I got married, I did almost everything myself. Jenny had trouble boiling water. 30 days after the judge's ruling, Darla and I were married at the courthouse with the children present. Her best friend performed the ceremony in Darla's place, and Tom performed the ceremony in my place. After the ceremony, I kissed Darla on the lips. Her face reflected pure joy. A week after Darla and I were married, Jenny and Brad's wedding was reported in the society papers. Jenny looked as happy as she could possibly be. However, the happiness on my children's faces struck me to the core. It wasn't fair. But as the weeks went by, it seemed to me that Tom's prediction that the pain would eventually subside would never come true. Even if some days the pain wasn't as sharp, my nights were filled with loneliness and agony. For the first 6 months, I kept trying to think of ways to get revenge. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't think of anything that I wouldn't go to jail for. How could I hurt a man whose fortune was estimated at several $100 million? And what could I do to Jenny? Tell her parents? They already knew, and Jenny didn't care. And yet it hurt me deeply, because every picture I saw in the newspaper had a woman in it, radiant and happy. She had a career and left me in the dust. In my darkest moments, I considered poisoning my children's minds about their mother. But I loved them too much to do something like that. My pain remained acute. And even worse was the fact that my children seemed content with the new order of things. And I couldn't blame them because, truth be told, They had the best of both worlds. They saw their mother and father regularly. My kids told me how wonderful everything was at Brad's house. They raved about the pool, hot tub, game room, tennis court, and big screen TVs in every room in Brad's house. He even had a mini movie studio with a popcorn machine. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Jenny changed the peaceful rules we had been following. She began trying to manipulate Glenda and Mark against me. Jenny subtly hinted that I was a bad father because I didn't spend as much money on them as Brad did. When they told me that, I was filled with sadness and anger. When Darla found out, she was furious. She insisted that we sit the kids down and talk to them. So the next time they came to visit for 2 weeks, I sat them down at the kitchen table and asked, "Do you guys think I'm a bad dad because I don't spend as much money on you as Brad and Mom do?" "That's what Mom says," Mark replied uncertainly. "Mark's son, Mr. Colson, is a very, very rich man. That's why your mom decided to marry him. I can't afford to buy you all the things they can buy you. You see, compared to Mr. Colson, I'm a very poor man. All I can do is love you boys and tell you that if all these gifts are important to you, I won't make you come to the ranch anymore." Glenda began to cry. "No, Daddy, I don't want to be with Mommy all the time. I want to be with you too." "Me too," Mark said, and tears came to his eyes. I don't know what the kids said to Jenny when they got back to her, but it pissed her off and she hurried back to the ranch. Why the hell are Mark and Glenda mad at me for picking on their poor daddy? She snapped at me when I opened the door. I wasn't about to get into an altercation with her, so I just said, "Fuck off, Jenny." Then I slammed the door in her face. That was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Jenny began planning special trips for the kids. The first was a trip to Disneyland. Of course, they wanted to go and begged me until I gave in. Jenny started doing it every third month or so, and it was really annoying me. It was Darla who gave me the idea on how to get out of the situation with Jenny. The next time they came to me wanting to go to New York, I told them it was okay. We would just switch weeks. When Jenny said no, the kids were upset with her, not me. Point in favor of the good guys. It was a very stressful and depressing time in my life. Luckily for me, I had great support. Darla was always there to pick me up when I started to give up. But I also had two other allies, John and Alma Smith. Yes, Jenny's parents became my staunch allies. When Jenny married Brad, she didn't even invite her own parents to the wedding. She was embarrassed of them and didn't want her parents to ruin her special day. When I found out about it, I invited them to the ranch the same day as the wedding for a barbecue. Darla insisted that John and Alma stay the weekend. We had a great time with them, and I learned that John had been a soldier in Vietnam. He was wounded 3 times but survived the war. He came home partially disabled, which limited his ability to work. It wasn't that he couldn't do the job, but employers, after looking at his 3 missing fingers and the scars on his face, decided he would be a liability. I was so impressed when Alma told me that he was awarded 3 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and a Silver Star. This man was a true hero, and Jenny was ashamed of him? I think it was at that point that my feelings for Jenny began to fade. From then on, we usually invited them over for at least one weekend when the kids were with me. Jenny refused to invite her parents to her new home or visit them in hers. The way Jenny treated her parents broke my heart. At least Mark and Glenda got to know their grandparents through visits to the ranch. And here's another thing I learned. John grew up on a cattle ranch. Before Vietnam, he was a real cowboy. And John even convinced me to start learning to ride. It opened up a whole different world for me in dealing with kids. As the months went by, I read many books on divorce and co-parenting. One piece of advice I came across proved to be very valuable. The author suggested that instead of buying the kids things, give them experiences. And Darla was imaginative in coming up with things to do. We visited all the local attractions, hiked many times, bowled, and even played miniature golf. Darla even partnered with a local charity league to put on a mini rodeo. And to make it even more fun for the kids, she involved them in the planning. Glenda and Mark were looking forward to their first rodeo, especially when they learned they would be leading the parade through town. However, Jenny tried to sabotage the rodeo by offering to take the kids to Disneyland in California. But Mark and Glenda flatly refused their mother. They didn't want to miss their first rodeo ever. And it was so successful that it has been an annual event ever since. During the first year after the divorce, Jenny continued to try to win the child's favor. She never stopped making snide remarks about me. From time to time, she convinced the kids to give up a few days with me to do something with her and Brad. And while I felt bad every time the kids chose to spend time with their mother over me, I never put them on notice. And every night they were with me, I continued to read 2 books before bed. Of course, as they got older, I had to read the books chapter by chapter, and I read a few chapters each night. It went on like that until 5th grade. Even though we didn't sleep together, living with Darla was very pleasant. She was fun to be with because her disposition was always cheerful and kind. And by working in her den, I was able to grow my accounting business. By the end of the first year, I was making about 70% of the salary I'd made working for Brad. Nevertheless, even a year after the divorce, Jenny was still trying to surpass me in the eyes of the child. By this time, however, Brad realized that I would never let him adopt my children. After realizing this, he began to lose interest in them. He was still kind and friendly with them, but they were just other people's kids. Brad began to monopolize more and more of Jenny's time. Brad wanted Jenny to be with him when he went overseas. If she had 2 weeks to have the kids, they traveled with them. At first, I was against Glenda and Mark leaving the country. I had heard horror stories of spouses kidnapping children and fleeing to a country where there was no extradition. Jenny continued to insist that I allow the children to go on their first trip abroad. Darla convinced me that, although Brad was a scumbag, he couldn't afford the scandal that kidnapping my children would cause. In the end, I agreed. Glenda and Mark were thrilled with the trip and talked about it for days. Several more trips followed, during which the children traveled abroad with their mother. One day, Brad's trip had to be extended, and I figured Jenny would just leave the kids with her. But instead, she called me and put the kids on a flight home where I met them at the airport. The first anniversary of the divorce passed unnoticed by me. It wasn't until Tom called me one day to see how I was doing that I realized it was my wedding anniversary and I hadn't even mentioned it to Darla. And in that moment, I had to admit that Tom was right. Almost all the pain, loneliness, and anger was gone. The occasional hurt remained, but for the most part, Jenny was just an unpleasant memory. However, I felt very guilty for not getting Darla anything for our anniversary. I realized it wasn't a real marriage, but Darla was so supportive, so I gave her flowers and took her out to dinner. I didn't give it much thought, but Darla was radiant for days afterward. However, closer to 18 months, Darla seemed to become moody. She was never unpleasant, but I could see that she was upset. I decided I had already exhausted my resource and began looking for a new place to live. Even though custody wasn't much of a problem these days, I wasn't going to take any chances. I searched for a long time until I found a townhouse to rent. It had 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. It also had a 1-car garage, but most importantly, it was located in the Chesterton School District. I really didn't want to move. I loved living on the ranch, and running the business from my room was just perfect. Plus, I really enjoyed Darla's company. Until the last few weeks, she was always happy and cheerful. On my advice, Darla expanded the ranch. She bought 200 more acres of land in the Rocky Hills. The trails in these hills were especially enjoyed by those who didn't want to just ride in the corral. It was a great place for groups who spent weekends riding, sleeping, and cooking outdoors. It was a favorite place for corporations doing team-building weekends. I then convinced Darla to start offering summer camps for kids. These became very popular, and Darla had to hire additional people to organize them. Darla then built a dozen cabins for adults who wanted to work on a real horse ranch. I helped organize the financing for this project. The business that was barely supporting Darla's life was now bringing her almost $200,000 a year after taxes. My business had grown so large that I used a den and a utility room. I had a secretary and bookkeeper working for me. My income was about 70% more than I made working for Brad. I had completely forgotten about it, but eventually Brad's company negotiated a settlement of the wrongful termination lawsuit. Tom felt I should expect more, but I wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. They paid me $250,000. Although Tom was entitled to a third, I gave him half. The other half I put aside to buy a new house and set up an office. Damn! The night before the 18th month, I announced my intentions while the children were with their mother. Darla, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, I began as sadness descended on me. You saved me when I thought I was going to lose Mark and Glenda. I know it was really hard, but it was a lifesaver for me. Our contract expires tomorrow, so I found a place to rent temporarily until I buy a house, and hopefully it won't be a big deal if I keep using the den for another month since I haven't signed the lease for the office space yet. Hopefully, by next week, it will be ready. I don't know what reaction I was expecting, perhaps relief, but I didn't expect what I got. Darla burst into tears and ran off to her bedroom. I was stunned and didn't know what to do. I tried knocking on her door, but Darla didn't answer. As I went to bed that night, I was overcome with deep anxiety. Although Darla and I were married, we had never been intimate. There was no doubt that I cared for her, and I cared for her very much. She was everything Jenny wasn't. But the whole time I lived in her house, I was afraid of offending her, so I kept my distance. Except for the occasional hug or kiss on the cheek, we went our separate ways. I talked to her in the mornings. Around midnight, however, a violent thunderstorm broke out. Lightning bolts struck very close to the house. One of them struck particularly close, shaking the house and waking me up. A few seconds later, my bedroom door swung open and Darla slipped in. "Mike, please, I'm terribly afraid of thunderstorms," she whimpered. "Can I sleep with you?" "Sure," I said, lifting the blanket. Shivering, Darla snuggled up against me. It was then I realized she was naked. "I'm really afraid of thunder and lightning," she whispered, shivering. I pulled her to me and hugged her. "Please, Mike, I know you don't love me, but I need you to make love to me at least once before you leave." At that moment, I realized that I had very deep feelings for Darla. It wasn't the same kind of love I had felt for Jenny. It was a more mature friendship that had grown into something more over the course of 18 months. Making love to Darla that night was the final piece of the puzzle that healed me. "Darla, I don't know if it's love, but I know I never want to leave you. At first, I thought we were just friends, but month after month, my feelings for you grew. The last few months, I wanted more, but I was afraid you didn't feel the same way. I couldn't risk you kicking me out if I took one step forward. Oh, Mike, I fell in love with you almost from the first time I met you. However, you were married to Jenny, and I knew you were madly in love with her. When she left you and we came up with a plan to pretend to be married, I thought I had a chance. But today, when you told me you were leaving, I was devastated. I love you so much. I'll be a good wife to you. Please give me a chance. I'll only leave if you kick me out," I kissed her softly. "This is my home, and you are my wife from now and forever." 18 months to 10 years after DD Day. After that night with Darla, we woke up to a sunny day without a single cloud in the sky. Suddenly, I had a completely different perspective on my messy life. I had been through a terrible betrayal, but had come out of it in a much better situation than I could have imagined. The pain, anger, and loneliness had been banished. Now I could think about Jenny without feeling something clenching my heart. I had finally achieved an opposite love for my ex-wife. Now I didn't care about her. What had once been a sham marriage was now real and loving. I decided that Darla and I needed to go on our honeymoon. I asked her where she wanted to go to celebrate our final realization that we loved each other deeply. I expected her to say something like Paris or Hawaii. I wouldn't have been surprised if she had said Las Vegas, but she didn't want to go to either of those cities. Instead, Darla wanted to go to Montana. "Why Montana specifically?" I asked. My daddy always told me stories about the ranch he worked on in Montana. He loved working there, and it was that experience that made him want to have his own ranch. So when he moved to Texas, he bought the place. Land was a lot cheaper back then. Anyway, I always wanted to see Montana, but I didn't want to go by myself. "Why didn't he just buy a ranch in Montana?" I asked. "Because he hated winters." So we spent 2 weeks in Montana, traveling around the state, and even stopped for a week at a working ranch. Darla picked up a lot of ideas for her ranch. But the best part of the trip were the nights we cuddled and explored each other's bodies. The kids were happy to see us when we picked them up. And then they told me something that made me sad. Jenny and Brad had flown to Eastern Europe because Brad was opening 4 new factories in 3 different countries. While they were gone, they hired a nanny to watch Glenda and Mark. The children were unhappy with being looked after by a 50-year-old nanny who wouldn't let them do anything but go to school, do their homework, and watch a little TV. The nanny couldn't swim, so they couldn't even visit the pool. When Jenny picked up the kids 2 weeks later, I asked her about it. "Jenny, the kids told me that you and Brad went to Europe and left them with the nanny." "That's none of your business, Mike, so don't start." I held up my hands in a sign of surrender. "I'm not trying to pick a fight. I was just saying that If you have to leave, we'd love to take the kids rather than hire a nanny. We were on a business trip this time, so we couldn't help. I'm just saying that's one option. The custody agreement is very clear. 2 weeks here with you and 2 weeks with me and Brad, Jenny said in a nasty tone, and then told the kids to get in the car. The next day, I called Tom and told him about my conversation with Jenny and my offer. He advised me to wait until they did it again. Perhaps it was just a one-time thing. 6 weeks later, it happened again. I found out about it when I called the kids. Jenny and Brad were away for a week on another trip. By then, Tom had filed a petition to modify the custody agreement. After returning from Europe, Jenny called me and was outraged. She had seen the notice of the hearing to modify the custody agreement. Jenny stated to me in very strong terms that hell would freeze over before she would agree to any changes to the custody agreement. Tom advised me that the court might very well side with her. However, I told him I wanted to give it a try. Jenny's attorney, Mr. Silas, didn't seem too pleased to find himself in court on this issue. I also found it odd that Brad wasn't there, just Jenny. Your Honor, this is a waste of the court's time, Mr. Silas said. The custody agreement has been successful for almost 2 years now. My client sees no reason to change anything. Your Honor, we're only trying to do what's best for the children, Tom objected, and then laid out his arguments. We understand that Mr. Coulson has to travel frequently, and it's only natural that he wants his wife to accompany him. All we are asking Mrs. Coulson to do is to allow the children to stay with their father during her absence. And if Mrs. Coulson returns before the 2 weeks are up, the children will be returned to her residence at her convenience. Mr. Silas, do you have anything to add? The judge looked at him over his glasses. The custody agreement is working, and Mrs. Coulson would prefer to leave it unchanged. The judge shifted his gaze to the 2 desks and back again. Okay, that's easy. Although I agree with Mr. Silas that this custody agreement seems to be working well, and I fully understand that Mrs. Coulson will be traveling with her husband on many of these trips. However, it makes no sense to deprive the children of their father's company if the mother has to be away. Therefore, I grant Mr. Wilson's motion to modify the custody agreement in accordance with their proposal. I was stunned by the judge's quick decision and even more surprised that he ruled in my favor. But when I saw the cloud of anger looming over Jenny, I knew a storm was coming. Why are you such a pain in the ass? Jenny asked me in the hallway after the hearing. Jenny, I don't know what your problem is, but I'm sick of it. What is your problem? You're not around, so why can't the kids stay with me? From what I've heard, Glenda and Mark would have a lot more fun than sitting with that Nazi you hired to babysit them. Fuck you, Mike, she hissed and walked away. Do you have any idea what her problem is? I asked Tom. I can only guess, he replied. I think Jenny hates not being controlled, but more importantly, she's afraid the kids will start to love you more than they love her. You're probably right, I agreed with a sigh. Jenny is always trying to turn the kids against me, and she always makes me wait 10 or 15 minutes when I pick them up. But I still don't get it. Jenny has everything she wants, so why make such a mockery of her? Because she can, Tom said with a smile. Come buy me dinner. 2 years after that first night Darla and I spent as a real married couple, we had a baby girl we named Wendy. 18 months after that, we had a boy we named Stephen. Darla was not only a wonderful mom, but she was also mom number 2 to Glenda, and Mark became very protective of his new baby brother or sister. The next 5 years flew by like a blink of an eye, and during that time I'd say Mark and Glenda were with me 70 to 80% of the time. Jenny and Brad seemed to be bouncing all over the house. After our divorce, Jenny had a little contact with her parents. They visited her and Brad once or twice a year, usually at some restaurant for dinner. John and Alma were never invited to any parties at Brad's house, never invited to spend the night at Brad and Jenny's house. On the other hand, Darla and I invited John and Alma almost every weekend. The kids loved having them over, and admittedly, so did I, since they were like second parents to me. Besides, I enjoyed talking to John about his life. He had many occupations in his life, from working on a ranch to driving a truck to fixing up an auto body shop. He was also one of those who helped build the first World Trade Center. John worked in all phases of construction doing carpentry, drywall, and electrical work. He could even build a house and pour the foundation. He could do it all despite his shortcomings. From time to time, John would talk about his service in Vietnam. On those rare occasions when he talked about his war experiences, the wild horses couldn't tear me away from the chair next to him. He was a true American hero. Nah, it really bothered me that Jenny ignored her mother and father, and I know it hurt them deeply. I tried to talk to my ex-wife about her attitude toward her parents, but I got her standard response: mind your own business. I continued to follow Jenny and Brad on social pages, as had become my habit, but the kids also liked seeing their mother's pictures in the newspaper. When we first broke up, I kept a close eye on whether Jenny and Brad's marriage would dissolve, as I was sure it would. But as the years went by, Jenny and Brad seemed very happy, and although I never asked, according to Mark and Glenda, life at Brad's house was pleasant. The kids even liked Brad, and apparently he was nice to them. He also bought them tons of stuff, which the kids always love. Sadly, Alma passed away from cancer about 8 years after our divorce. She spent her last days with us at the ranch. There were quite a few people in attendance at the funeral, which was held locally. There is a private 1870s cemetery on the ranch, and John asked if we could bury Alma there. We, of course, agreed. John also asked if he could be buried next to her, and again we agreed. I wasn't sure if Jenny would come to the funeral, as she had only spoken to her father once since her mother's death. And that was when John called his daughter to inform her of her mother's passing. However, Jenny did show up with Brad. She was wearing a dark blue dress and sunglasses. I was a little surprised by Brad's appearance. His hair was starting to thin and gray. In addition, he had a hint of a potbelly. I figured he was spending too much time traveling, eating out, and not exercising enough. John stood up to greet his daughter, and it was an awkward moment. They stood looking at each other for what seemed like an eternity until John pulled his daughter into a hug. At first, Jenny just stood there, but then she slowly embraced her father. Brad walked over to John and shook his hand, offering his condolences. Mark and Glenda, who had been crying, walked over and hugged their mother. Brad turned to me, nodded, and smirked. I think he expected me to flinch at his presence. Instead, I smiled, extended my hand, and shook it. When we tried to take a seat in the front pew, there wasn't enough room, so I motioned for Brad and myself to sit on the second pew. Brad wasn't thrilled about it, especially when John insisted that I sit next to him. Darla ended up taking my place in the second pew with Brad. As the service began, I heard Brad grumbling behind me. Then I heard Darla hiss something at him. After a minute, Brad got up and left. When it was over, John invited Jenny and Brad to come back to the ranch for the burial and subsequent meal. But Jenny declined, citing that she had a plane to catch. I knew it was bullshit, but I didn't say anything. After the memorial service, I caught Darla alone and asked what had happened between her and Brad during the church service. Say it, I guess. He got mad because you were sitting in the front row with his wife, Darla said, shaking her head. But I sat on one side of John and Jenny sat on the other. We didn't sit together. I pointed that out to the high and mighty Mr. Coulson and then told him to shut up because the world doesn't revolve around him. Darla smiled mischievously. I think he was insulted. We laughed about the incident, but we shouldn't have. Brad doesn't react well to people who don't give him proper deference. In other words, he's a vindictive jerk who truly believes his shit doesn't stink. 2 weeks later, Brad began another land grab on Darla's ranch. This time he claimed 10 acres of land adjacent to his allotment. His attorneys found out that those 10 acres had once been a separate parcel. Due to a clerical error, they were not included in the single ownership of the rest of the ranch. Therefore, taxes were never assessed on those 10 acres. Brad had his accountants calculate what the taxes on those 10 acres should have been and paid the county that amount. His attorneys then demanded a tax return. Darla was upset by this demand, even though the 10 acres were a mixture of swampy and rocky land. Darla asked me if she should just sign the deed, since the land wasn't worth that much. Absolutely not, I replied immediately. Brad is being a bully and trying to put you in your place for insulting him. You didn't have the money to fight him last time. It's time to shove it up your ass and end the relationship. His claims are bogus. As I predicted, the court sided with Darla. They said that the county was to blame for the failure to collect taxes on the 10 acres. Moreover, the county should have first notified the current owner and given him an opportunity to pay the delinquent bill. And to top it all off, the court limited the tax payment period to 5 years. After that, I didn't see Brad in person for a long time. I saw him and Jenny on social media pages from time to time. During that same period of time, I rarely saw Jenny. More often than not, when I came to pick up the kids, one or the other staff member was already ready and waiting for me at the front door, and that was fine. In addition, Jenny continued to miss spending time with the kids as Brad traveled more and more. So, over the years, I estimated that the kids stayed with me about 9 months out of the year, and it got to the point where they hated going back to their mother's house and Brad's house. They complained that Brad had become moody, and their mother was almost always absent. And then there was a scoop in the newspaper. Brad had filed for divorce from Jenny. It was a complete shock to me, and I couldn't understand why. And the kids were just as confused as I was, but a few weeks went by and it was revealed that Brad had caught Jenny cheating on him with billionaire Thad Dumont. That explanation spoke for itself. Jenny was changing again. Tad was not only richer than Brad, he was also considerably younger. Darla and I couldn't help but be amused by this turn of events. Shortly after Brad and Jenny's divorce was finalized, Jenny married Tad. To me, this was a wonderful thing. Thad didn't live in the Chesterton School District, so for practical purposes, Glenda and Mark lived with me and Darla all the time. Shortly after Alma died, I convinced John to sell his house and move in with us. And since John was good at construction, Darla hired him to do some repairs on the ranch. Then Darla and I decided to expand the house to make a dining room for the ranch workers and expand my bookkeeping. This caused another fight with Brad. He fought to have our building permit denied. Eventually, we got the permit because we had excellent rights of way. John took responsibility for the new construction and did about 85% of the work himself. It was a little over a year after Thad and Jenny's wedding, and Jenny filed for divorce. There were rumors that Jenny had caught Tad cheating on her with an 18-year-old girl. Then there was another rumor that I later learned was true. Tad only married Jenny because he didn't like Brad and decided to take his wife away from him. Talk about karma. Now I get up every morning and thank God for all the blessings he has bestowed upon me. From age 10 to 30 years after DD Day. The years went by and we had our ups and downs and one terrible tragedy. Mark was in a car accident that could have killed him. However, he was lucky and escaped with a broken leg and wrist, as well as bruises, scrapes, and cuts. John suffered a mild stroke that left him slightly paralyzed on his left side. Physical therapy helped him, and he now walks with only a slight limp. Darla never seems to get sick. She told me she doesn't have time to be sick with 4 kids, the ranch, and me. I, on the other hand, have been very lucky. I hadn't felt well in weeks. I had no energy and was plagued by headaches and nausea. I kept brushing it off until one day Darla took my hand and dragged me to the doctor. After a bunch of tests, it turned out that I had one artery so badly clogged that I was about to have a heart attack. I was operated on and had a triple bypass. After the surgery, even though I was still in a hospital bed, I couldn't believe how much better I felt. If you're wondering if I thought about going back to Jenny after she became single, the answer is hell no. The thought hadn't crossed my mind until Darla mentioned it. One night after dinner, while we were watching TV, the thought crossed my mind. Darla asked me, "Have you ever thought about getting back together with Jenny?" Darla tried to make it sound casual, but I could see the fear in her eyes. One day I saw an old man sitting in the waiting room and I went to see what I could do to help him. When he looked up, I was shocked. It was Brad. "Brad, this is a surprise," I said, holding out my hand. Brad took my hand and shook it weakly. He looked unimpressed, but before I could say anything, he spoke. "You won," he said sadly. "I won what?" I asked in confusion. "I really loved her," Brad said, "and I thought she really loved me." And then it came to me that he was talking about Jenny, and I assumed, yeah, she has a way of making you fall in love with her. But Jenny has always had one big flaw. She was born poor and never got over it. She thinks more money means more happiness. "Now I understand how you felt when Jenny left you," Brad admitted. "How did you survive?" "One day at a time and with the help of a loving woman," I answered honestly. "There is no magic cure." Brad sighed. "It's too late for me to look for someone else. Besides, I love Jenny with all my heart. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I have stage 4 cancer and I wanted to apologize to you. I knew it was wrong to pursue a married woman, but I just fell in love with Jenny. I hope someday you can forgive me." Looking at the old man standing in front of me, I realized that I had once hated him with my whole being, but now I just felt sorry for him. "Brad, there was a time when I hated you," I admitted. But that time is long gone, and if you want my forgiveness, you'll get it." He smiled sadly again, thanked me, and left. He died 5 months later. Darla and I attended the service. I was surprised at how few people showed up. However, among those in attendance was Jenny. She was very upset about Brad's death and even more upset with me. "You had to come and gloat, didn't you?" Jenny pounced on me. "You couldn't let me bury him in peace. You wanted everyone to see that you'd won." I was furious. "You're a hypocrite. You left him for a man with tons of money and now you're crying crocodile tears over his death. Brad apologized to me months ago and I accepted his apology. Have you ever apologized to Brad for setting him up?" I didn't wait for an answer. I took Darla's hand and we left. The drive home was quiet for a while, but then Darla turned to me and asked, "Who pooped in your Krispy Crumbs this morning?" I couldn't help myself and burst into laughter. Darla always had a way of making me laugh. When Brad's will became public, I was surprised. Oh, he left most of his fortune to charity and his alma mater. But he also left $2 million to Jenny. Jenny, who received this last inheritance from two wealthy husbands, was doing just fine. She bought an apartment near the ranch and tried to reunite with her children. However, the children didn't want to go to their mother's house. Since the condo was designed for middle-aged singles, they complained that there was nothing for them to do there. But I told them that their mother was making an effort and they should too. In the end, the distance proved to be too great. Eventually, Jenny gave up and found a new boyfriend. From then on, Jenny changed boyfriends like people change socks. The kids seemed happy that they didn't have to spend time at their mother's house. And since they were happy, I was happy. I was very proud of our kids. Mark graduated from Georgia Institute of Technology with a degree in engineering. He works and lives in Austin. He married a lovely girl from Ohio, Cindy Stubbins, whom he met at GT. She is also an engineer and they work at the same firm. They have two beautiful daughters and Cindy works from home. Glenda attended Texas A&M University to become a veterinarian. After graduation, Glenda moved home and worked for local veterinarian Sam Turner for several years. She then separated and opened her own practice. About a year later, a young veterinarian named Todd Amberson bought out Sam's practice. I guess it was inevitable, but Glenda and Todd ended up merging the two practices and merged their lives when they married. They have two boys and a little girl, and I swear my grandchildren spend more time at the ranch than they do in their own home. Not only do Darla and I love having them around, but Jenny's dad probably spends more time with the kids than anyone else. They just adore him. My daughter Alma graduated from the University of Texas with a teaching degree. She now teaches 3rd grade at Chesterton Elementary School. She married her college boyfriend, Jerry, who teaches at Marion Middle School. He's a chemistry teacher. In 3 months, give or take a few days, they are expecting their first child. I couldn't be happier because I adore grandchildren. They are better than your own children. I'm kidding, but grandchildren have a lot to say. You can spoil them to no end, and when they get cranky and fussy, you give them back. Mark married a beautiful girl he met while on vacation in England. No, she wasn't English. She was just another American on vacation. Her name is Sally. She is 5 feet tall, with long, dark black hair and violet eyes. I tease her by saying she's a mini Elizabeth Taylor. They have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and we just found out she's pregnant with a 4th. It amazes me that Sally has no problem carrying these children, being as small as she is. The years continued to rush by, and before I knew it, Darla and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. For the past few years, I have rarely seen Jenny. The kids have occasional contact with their mother, but they rarely see her. From what they tell me, time has begun to catch up with their mom, as it has with all of us. She's not the beauty she used to be, and apparently she hasn't had a boyfriend in years. Jenny called her dad once every 2 months or so. He was approaching 90, but he still got around fine and was still as alert as a glass. Conversations between father and daughter were always pretty short, and John always remained a little depressed. When I once asked him why he didn't talk to Jenny for longer, he admitted that he just didn't know what to say to her. I felt sad for John. Another Christmas was fast approaching, and I headed to the mall for some Christmas shopping. I admitted a long time ago that I am completely inept at picking out gifts, so I just find out what stores my family likes to shop at. Then I go there and buy gift cards. I know it sounds so lame, but That way I can never buy the wrong thing, size or color. And so far, I haven't had a single complaint. Anyway, I had just bought my last card and I was hungry. So I headed to the food court to order a Chick-fil-A sandwich and a lemonade. I was just about to take the first bite when I recognized the woman sitting 2 tables away from me. It was Jenny. She sat alone and watched the people passing by. She was especially interested in the families that filled the mall. Jenny was no longer the beauty I had married. She had gained about 15 pounds and had a few wrinkles. Even from where I was sitting, the age spots on her arms were visible. Still, she was attractive for her age. But it was the loneliness in her eyes that caught my attention. I decided not to hesitate and approached her. "Hey, mind if I join you?" I asked, placing my sandwich and drink on the table. "What do you want?" Jenny snapped back. I was surprised by her hostility. It took me a moment to realize it, but then I picked up my sandwich and drink. "I don't need anything. I just wanted to say hi. Look, I'm sorry for bothering you. I don't want to start a fight, so I'll just find another table." No. A look of pain appeared on Jenny's face and she flinched slightly. "No, I'm really sorry. The holidays seem to bring out the worst qualities in me. Please have a seat. I want to have some company." "What brings you to the mall? Christmas shopping?" I asked, taking a bite out of my chicken sandwich. "Mike, I haven't done any Christmas shopping since Brad and I got divorced. Now I just send checks. And the kids really appreciate them, especially the ones for the grandkids. They put that money into college funds." "I know," Jenny replied, watching the young couple roll a baby stroller past. "They tell me about it in thank you notes." So back to the original question. What brought you to the mall? As I recall, you didn't really care about shopping in general. If you needed something, you went to the store, bought it, and went home. "I just wanted to be around people," Jenny replied absent-mindedly, watching a young couple who were trying to get their 3 children to sit down at the table. "In my house, everyone is separated for the vacations." "And what are you going to do for Christmas? You're not going to sit in your apartment alone, are you?" "Of course not," Jenny replied. "I have reservations at Chez Francesca, and then I plan to watch the new movie with Tom Hanks." "No, you're not going to do that," I said, finishing my sandwich. "You're coming to the ranch for Christmas. Your kids and grandkids will be there, and your dad will be there too. It'll be fun." "I can't do that," Jenny protested. "I'll be a nuisance to everyone." "Nonsense," I said, picking up my trash. "It's settled that you're coming." Then, as I was leaving, I looked back and said, "If you want to see the grandchildren open their presents, you'd better be there by 7 o'clock in the morning. But come whenever you want. Dinner will be served at 3. "No." Darla wasn't too happy when I told her Jenny could come for Christmas. "Why did you invite her?" she asked with jealousy and uncertainty flashing in her eyes. I quickly put my arm around my wife and kissed her. "Is it my wife who's jealous?" "Stop it, Mike. I'm serious." Darla's eyes were blazing now. "She's going to make everyone feel awkward." That's what Jenny said when she tried to get out of it. But I couldn't let her spend the day alone in my apartment. "What happened to Jenny?" John asked, entering the room. "I invited Jenny to join us for Christmas," I said to the man I considered my second father. "And she said she was coming?" John's eyes lit up, and I could see that Darla had noticed it too. "Not exactly," I explained. "Jenny tried to make excuses because she thought it would be awkward for everyone, but I didn't take no for an answer. Whether she comes or not is still up to her." The light of happiness in John's eyes faded, but it was quickly replaced by a look of hope. At Christmas, Jenny didn't come to watch the grandchildren open presents, and she didn't show up for dinner at 3 o'clock. By then, I had already realized she wasn't coming, and apparently John thought the same. He looked depressed and sat quietly by himself. I felt sorry for him, and eventually sent my youngest granddaughter, Christy, who was 4 years old, to play her game. As I suspected, he was soon sitting on the floor playing Candyland. Around 5:30, I was surprised to hear the front doorbell ring. Opening the door, I was surprised to find Jenny. She was dressed as if she was going out to dinner. "Hi," I said kindly. "I was beginning to lose hope for you." "I still think it might be a mistake," she said with uncertainty in her eyes. "No, not at all," I assured her. "You missed dinner, but we're going to serve dessert pretty soon. But if you want to eat something, I can heat up a plate of leftovers for you." "No, dessert is fine," Jenny said as I walked her inside. "Hey guys and gals," I addressed everyone in the family room. "Look who I found. Jenny's here for dessert." The grandkids pounced on her with the whole pack. They were picking teams for some game, and they all wanted Jenny to be on their team. Mark and Glenda came over and hugged and kissed their mom and wished her a Merry Christmas. In fact, all the kids hugged her. However, to my surprise, Darla also hugged and kissed Jenny. The evening went very pleasantly. Jenny was very nervous at first and seemed to weigh everything she was told. But when she finally realized that she was the only one who was uncomfortable, she began to relax. It was touching to see Jenny and her father sitting together talking and laughing. All in all, it was a very enjoyable Christmas. Although Jenny had calmed down since arriving, it was obvious that she was still unsure about being in Darla and I's house. And I have to admit, I did study Jenny from time to time. She was still an attractive woman, but I was amazed that I had no feelings for her other than the fact that she was the mother of my 2 children. When the grandchildren had settled down, their parents decided to use the hot tub. Since it was 34 degrees outside, neither Darla, Jenny, nor I were interested in doing so. John decided to give it a try, but came back a few minutes later and said you'd have to be crazy to sit in the tub, even though it was heated to 30. Anyway, I got us all drinks and we sat down around the fireplace where the Christmas tree was twinkling. For 15 minutes, we sat in silence, watching the flames dancing around the logs. At one point, I noticed tears streaming down Jenny's face. "Are you okay?" I asked, not realizing what the tears were for. "I'll be fine," Jenny replied in a thin voice, wiping away the tears. Neither Darla nor I said anything about the tears and let the silence surround us again. After another 5 minutes, Jenny spoke up. "I almost didn't come," Jenny said, looking at the fire. "I was afraid I'd find out what I already pretty much knew. I've made a big mess of my life." "Oh, I think you're being too hard on yourself," Darla marveled. "I saw pictures of you and Brad, and it was clear you loved him. And I'd say the same thing about Thad. Neither marriage worked out, but 50% of all marriages end in divorce anyway." "Oh, I did love Brad at first, though I still loved you, Mike. But his money and power I loved more. We were good together for years, but I let him separate me from my children. And since he was 15 years older than me, age began to catch up with him. He started having health problems, which affected his abilities in bed. He became frustrated and angry. I started cheating on Brad about 6 months before I started dating Thad. I saw the same hurt and hatred in Brad's eyes that I saw in yours, Mike. Almost from the beginning of our marriage, I suspected Thad of cheating on me. And when I caught him, he just laughed at me. He told me that he hated Brad because of some business deal and only married me to spite him. I was devastated and suddenly realized how you and Brad felt. After I was free of Thad, I decided to hell with marriage. I was just going to enjoy life. I had more than enough money to do whatever I wanted, so I had one loveless affair after another. That was about as much of an apology as Jenny was capable of. After a few moments of silence, Jenny drained her glass and stood up. "I have to go." Darla, John, and I tried to convince Jenny to stay the night, but she refused. Then John and I walked her to the car. Her father hugged her tightly and told her he loved her. Jenny's tears flowed again. She wiped them away, and before she got into the car, she gave me a big hug and said, "Thank you." Then Jenny drove away. I don't know what the next few years hold for us. I believe that Jenny truly regrets many of the choices she has made in her life. Whether she decides to reunite with her family is her choice. The house is quiet now, with only the occasional pop or crackle from the fireplace. I couldn't help but think about how sad my ex-wife was, and yes, I felt sorry for her. As for me, I wanted to kick myself for all the time I had wasted trying to find a way to get back at Jenny and Brad. As I sat and watched the fire dance, I remembered the Bible verse again. Not for the swift run, not for the strong fight, not for the wise food, not for the brilliant riches, not for the learned favor, but time and chance happen to all. As it turns out, time proved to be a sure retribution. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.